This is an interview with Mrs. Elizabeth Cunningham, interviewed by Pendleton Woods in Clinton, Oklahoma on April 9th, 1971. It is being copied for inclusion in the permanent collection of the Oral History Program on March 30th, 1990 by Joel Todd.
This is Penn Woods interviewing for the Oklahoma Living Legends. This is Good Friday of 1971, and I'm at Clinton, Oklahoma in the offices of the Clinton Daily News. And I'm visiting with Mrs. Cunningham, Mrs. Elizabeth Rennick Cunningham. R-E-N-I-K, yes, we ought to get it correct. R-E-N-I-C-K, Mrs. Elizabeth Rennick Cunningham. And your married name was Mrs. what?
Well, my single name was, my married name is Cunningham.
Yes.
But I was a Rennick before I was
I
married.
see. That's fine. So we will start off, I think to start off to find, I know that Ms. Cunningham is one of the early pioneers of Clinton, and I think it would be of interest to know where she was born, where she went to school, and most important, what brought her to Oklahoma. Why don't you tell us about who your parents were to begin with, and then where you were born and where you were educated?
Well, my parents were Mr. William R. Rennick and Amanda S. Rennick, and I was born in Ray County, Missouri. Oh, I'll have to say when.
No, you don't have to.
Well, then what do I say?
Well, where did you go to school?
I finished high school in Norman, Missouri.
And then
I came to Oklahoma in 1907, and I finished college in Weatherford in 1933, I think. But now,
you attended Southwestern?
yes.
And what you attended when, finished when?
In 1933, but I didn't get my diploma because the last 3 hours, well, I don't want to put that out
Okay.
the last 3 hours I was required to take it, I had to take it home on account of illness.
Oh, I see. Well, you had taught a long time then before you attended Southwestern.
I taught 6 years in Missouri.
6 years in Missouri. I guess. And what brought you to Oklahoma?
Well, I don't like to tell that, it was my health.
Oh, well, all right. You came to Oklahoma in 1907.
1907.
It apparently was very good for your health, though. So I shouldn't worry about that.
Well, I don't have to worry about it now.
No. You came here in 1907. Why don't you describe Clinton as you recall it when you first came here?
Well, there's so many interesting things and so many personal things, it's hard to tell it all.
Well, why don't you tell what the town looked like?
Well, I visited Clinton in 1905, and at that time we had to come by train to Foss. There was no Clinton here then. There was just Foss. I don't know what they called it. I don't know what it was, but anyway. But anyway, we got off at Foss, and I visited relatives out at Butler. And at that time, I became quite interested in Oklahoma. However, I went back home and taught 2 years, and then I came back in 1907. Shall I say I had school in Arapahoe before I came?
Yes, I think so.
My uncle from Butler, Oklahoma, had gotten me a position in the Arapahoe school before I came. And I was required to come out here and attend summer normal, which was held at the county seat, which was Arapahoe. And that was quite a time.
Tell about it.
It was quite interesting. It was well attended. And at that time, we didn't have summer school. I don't suppose that Weatherford or I'd have gone. But I was required to go there. I'd like to tell this, but I don't like it. I had chances to teach in Weatherford, Thomas, and Custer City.
Well.
And then there's another thing happened. As I came out here, they put me on the wrong train at Tulsa.
Tell about that.
Well, I'd be backing up.
No.
Well, that's something that was quite interesting to me. I was quite young then and inexperienced. And when I changed cars at Tulsa, I'm just going to go out where? Where's this going?
Oh, well, let's forget that. Let me just hold it and you just talk.
Well, as I said, when I changed cars at Tulsa, it was early in the morning before daylight. And I said I wanted to go to Clinton. And they put me on the train going back to Clinton, Missouri. Well, as soon as it got daylight, I told the conductor, I said, I'm going back home. And I don't want to do that. I want to go to Clinton, Oklahoma. He said, well, we have put you on the wrong train. So they put me off at Catoosa. And Catoosa was just a little bit of an old town. And they had just a, very ordinary hotel. And they said I couldn't get out of there till the next day. And I was just frightened to death. But there were a bunch of traveling men there. And of course, there's no place for me to stay but in the lobby. And they got to talking about how things went on there. Said last night there was a man killed for killing another man's dog. And I thought, I'm not going to stay all night in Catoosa. So I went back over to the depot and asked if there's any way I could get out to Clinton. They said no, but I could go to Ponca City. Well, as a family had moved out from Northern Missouri to Ponca City, Oklahoma, 2 families. And I knew that one of the girls, that some of them had gone to school with me back there, and I knew I could stay all night with them. So they took after me to go up to apply for school at Ponca City. So I had this other school. I don't know why I let them persuade me, but anyway, we went around to see all the school board. And I came on to Oklahoma, to Clinton, and the next day they called me and said I'd been elected to teach Ponca City.
Ponca City.
Well, my uncle just was furious, after he'd gotten that. Well, of course, I had to resign at Ponca City. But that was that. So we came on, and my uncle lived out at Butler. That's Buzz's grandfather. So I went out there for the summer then, and my cousin out there and his daughter and I rented a house over here in Butler, in Clinton, or in Rappel, and went to school. And we went out to my uncle's every Friday. And at that time was watermelon season. We could always stop on the way. And there would be signs up, take a watermelon. And we never failed. So we did that. We went through the whole summer, and I took the examination. And during this summer, now this seems to be bragging, but I told you I could have gotten, school boards would come in looking for teachers. And anyway, I had to stay at a rap hole. So I did, and the superintendent that we taught under at that time was elected superintendent over here the next year. And so he brought 2 of we teachers over here with him. And I taught here 8 years.
Wow.
It was during that time that Mr. Farr went to school.
What was Arapahoe like when...
Well, Arapahoe was a nice town. It was a very nice town. There were 2 banks and 2 or 3 grocery stores and dry goods stores.
How big was it then?
Well, I don't remember about the population. Several churches that aren't there now. Well, anyway, 2 that are not there now.
And you first came to Clinton in 7, is that correct? In
19... I taught in Arapahoe 7 and 8.
No, 7
and then I came over here
in 1908. 1908. What was
Well, Clinton was just a little bit of a burg then, and there was only one real school building. There were 8 teachers, but only one school building.
Wow.
And the 2-room school building was, well, do you know where the Coleman Hotel is?
Yes.
Well, that little 2-room school building was in the next block. And another lady and I taught there, and I had the 7th grade, I think it was that year.
Wow.
Just the biggest bunch you ever saw, great big old boys. But anyway, I taught there that year, and then the next year I believe we had the new school building.
What do you recall who some of your early pupils were who may have played a role in Clinton?
Well, they did. There was Dr. Leland Lamb, who's passed away now, and there was Byron Tansey, who was in... Now, these boys didn't go to school with me. They were older.
But they were in the school.
They were in the school. And Lone Farr, Cedric Randall, he's moved back here now. He's been away for years. Oh, I can't...
You became When was it you served as a county superintendent?
Well, that's a long story too. We lived on
I think
farm.
I'll switch this over and then we all turn it so that we can start on the other side. You became county. How did you become county superintendent? How'd that
Well, that's an interesting story too. Well, as I said, no, I hadn't said that, but I taught here the 8 years. And as I said, we lived on a farm. And we're just poor as church mice, like everybody else was then. Our house was just a little 2-room house, and you know, set the boards up like this, and then put a split over the middle of the cracks. Well, and then our kitchen was a half dugout. And my father and mother got sick. My father was bitten by a rattlesnake the first year we were on the farm. And he never was able to do much work after that. And my mother took rheumatism, so I just had to go home. And they gave me the country school in our district. And I taught out there 3 years.
Well.
And there was something in town then that the graduating class were taken by the county superintendent to visit outstanding schools in the county just for practice for them or for them to see what it was like in the country. And Fred LaRue, do you know him?
No.
Well, he is county judge here. Not county judge, but city judge, I think. And at that time, he was county superintendent. So he brought his graduating class, or that class, Clinton High School graduating class, out to my school. This is a story, it's true. But anyway, they were quite impressed with what they saw. And he wrote an awful nice piece had put in the Clinton paper. And the county commissioner was the chairman of the board in my home district. And when he saw that, then Mr. LaRue resigned. And I had a school in Oklahoma City for that year. I'd taught the 3 years in the country, and that sure was a job with all grades. And anyway, I just wanted to change. My folks got better, so I could leave home. So he called me one day, and I was packing my trunk to go to Oklahoma City to a teachers' meeting that weekend. And he said, Elizabeth, Fred LaRue's resigned, and I'm giving you the county superintendent's job. I was almost just jokes, I can't do that. He said, oh yes, you can too. He says, you go to Clinton this afternoon, and you get a banker, Lester Coleman was his name, to start a little petition for you. Well, Papa and Mama thought I ought to do it. So I came, and on Monday they met and gave me the county superintendent's job. Yeah, there were 3 commissioners, and there were 2 Republicans and 1 Democrat. And Mr. Stokes was the Democrat, and he was the one that was clerk in my school district. So he just named me.
What were some of the problems of a county superintendent during those
Well,
days?
when I was county superintendent, it was really a job, because we had 80 districts. You know, now they don't. There were all the towns, but not all the towns that were first class.
What were some of the principal problems you had?
Well, I don't know, the first was having people get along with each other, I guess. I guess you'd call that relationship.
Yeah.
But I never had any trouble. I just liked it fine. Finally, you get beaten.
What do you consider highlights of your career as a county superintendent?
Well, we built most of our schools. Then there was a system that they put in to make model schools, and certain things were required. I thought that was wonderful. Then we had several consolidations too during that time.
What did you do in the model school area? What were some of the...
Well, there were certain things that were required, certain library books, certain conditions of the school building, and there's scholastic too.
How many model schools did you have?
Well, I think 15 or 16. I really have kind of forgotten about that.
And you served about how many years?
12 years.
12 years. Did you go back to teaching after that?
No,
You did not?
No.
You going to Postmaster after that?
Well, I didn't do anything
Oh, I see.
for a year and a half.
Oh, I see. Uh-huh.
And then Postmaster.
Then went into Postmaster. Uh-huh. Thinking in terms of your early teaching experience, what are some interesting classroom situations you recall that might be?
Well, I never had much trouble.
Well, I'm not thinking necessarily of trouble.
Well,
I'm just thinking.
Well, I mean, now discipline's something.
Yes, it is. Uh-huh.
But discipline wasn't a problem
Uh-huh.
at that time. People taught their children to be different.
I wasn't thinking really as much of problems as just things that were highlights of the teaching career. That are things, exciting things that might have happened during the period you were teaching. Can you think of any?
I just don't know. A lot of things happened, all right.
Can you tell me any?
But I can't think just what you'd like.
Sure. Well, I'm thinking of maybe an exciting event that occurred, or a championship that your school might have won in something or other that you may have played a part in.
In those days, they just didn't have things like that
They
so
did
much.
not have.
Now, after I went out in my home district to teach, we had children there that entered what we called the county meet. We had county meet at that time. They didn't excel, especially those kids hadn't been taught much to do, so that they couldn't excel. But we had one little girl that entered in a reading contest. She didn't deserve it at all. But the superintendent of school here and I gave her a present anyway because she had the nerve to try it.
What were the principal social events of this period?
Well, there wasn't too much social business at Clinton. Well, in Arapahoe, there were just nice things going on.
You don't recall any specific events that might have been highlight events in the social area?
No.
What about in the cultural area? Were you involved in any of the cultural area, like maybe the library or the music or any of the literary or anything?
Well, we didn't have that then, Mr.
You did not?
Not at that time.
Yes.
That's come in later.
That's all. That's early. How about during the period you were county superintendent? Can you think of
Well, we had children that entered in the county meet all over the county.
Yes. What were the county meets in? Were they all the scholastic subjects?
Well, it was music, and we didn't have art then. It was music and reading, and then athletics too. And I didn't superintend that part of it so much.
What were the athletic events that were highlights during the early period?
Oh, they had tennis and I can't remember.
The
pole vaulting and things like that.
Were you don't recall anything that you would say was a highlight or an exciting part of your service as a county superintendent?
Well, it was all highlight to me.
All highlight.
I enjoyed it.
What about during this early period, what in the community, what people do you recall stood out in the community as the leaders of the community during your early period?
Like at Clinton and Arapahoe?
It could be in Clinton or Arapahoe.
Of course, the people at Arapahoe, nearly all those older settlers over there are gone.
Yes, Well, probably the early ones in Clinton are too that were the leaders. But do you remember who they were, who any of them were now?
Well, Mr. Ganaway.
Who was Mr. Ganaway?
Well, he was in the bank, in First National Bank. And Mr. Oh, take me off hand, I can't remember my name.
Sure. What about...
Mr. Farr was an outstanding man, Don's father. And Mr. Littell, Buzz's grandfather, was. And Mr. Coleman, Lester Coleman was.
Do you remember what the principal part, say, take Mr. Farr's father? What was the principal role he played?
Well, he was in all civic affairs, and I really don't know what his work was.
What about Miss Buzz's grandfather? You say
He was a builder, contractor.
And his name was what?
Littell.
Mr. Littell.
Ben Littell.
And what he was a contractor. Did he? Can you think of any particular buildings? Or
he built the old city hall.
He did.
And the old schoolhouse out of Washington. And they built a lot of these buildings here in town, but see, I don't remember about that. Dr. Lamb and Dr. Rogers were outstanding doctors here at that time. Mr. Pyatt, Harry Quiet, Mr. Quiet was another banker.
What brought about your becoming postmaster?
Well, that's a long story too.
And what town was it?
Custer City.
Custer City. Tell about that.
Well, as I said, I didn't work for a while. And did you ever hear of Jim McClintock?
No.
He was a congressman for a
Yes,
long time. My husband was quite a good friend of Mr. McClintock's, and he broached the subject of me being county superintendent, but postmaster. And I don't know how this all came about, but if I was to pay so much a month, which is part of my salary a month, then it was only $125. And Mr. Cunningham didn't take that. He just didn't think it was right to do it. So he campaigned for the other man against him, and he got it. And then I got the post office. Another two, George and Bert Meacham, the Meacham boys, they never let that man rest a minute. Well, in the meantime, my husband passed away. And they just kept the road home. But I should have the post office. But Mr. Cunningham went with, I'm bothering that. Mr. Cunningham went with him to campaign, which was very unpopular for him to do it, which it was because Mr. McClintock was a very popular man in the district.
How did Mr. Cunningham, when were you married?
Oh, let me see, forgotten.
You forgot. Was it before
1925.
25. And what did your husband, what did he do?
Well, he was county treasurer not treasurer, but assessor for a number of years. Then when he got beaten, he had a produce and gas station.
For Custer County?
Custer City.
Custer City. And he died what year?
1926.
36.
35.
35. And it was shortly after that you became postmaster.
In 32.
32. Oh, before then. What were some of the highlights that you can consider as a postmaster? What are the problems of a postmaster of a small town like that?
Well, this goes with every post office, I guess.
The what?
I said it goes with every post office. Well, I just got along fine with it. I just don't know what to say.
Do you recall any highlight events as a postmaster?
No, I don't.
There weren't many women postmasters, were there?
Well, I was on. No, there was the lady at Foss, I think, was a postmaster.
Where was your post office in Custer City? Was it inside of another building, or was it a separate?
No, it was in another building.
What
the bank owned the building. We were in the same building, or the same room with the bank at first. Then it was moved to the bank building still, but it was just next door.
And you served how many years as postmaster?
18.
18 years. You don't recall you don't recall any specific problems or any specific highlights as a postmaster?
Well, I don't know what would be a highlight.
I don't know. I don't know either. I'm not knowing a post office,
Well, there's a lot to be done in the post office, and I loved every bit of it. Oh, I just don't know.
Uh-huh.
I never had any trouble.
Sure. Uh-huh. And you retired as a postmistress and
Yes,
postmaster.
I
You
can-
call it postmaster or postmistress?
Well, I think either one is correct.
It's either way. And what year did you retire as postmaster?
I came over here in '54.
In '54. Have you been active in teaching or anything since '54?
No, I haven't taught. Sunday school classes.
What church?
First Baptist.
First Baptist. How long have you taught in Sunday school?
Well, I was elected to teach the class before I came over here.
Oh, that was.
There was going to be a vacancy in the Dorcas class,
In
and I was elected to it before I came.
In 1950. 54.
I stayed and helped the other postmaster 2 weeks.
What age did you teach
Well, I taught as high as the 7th.
in Sunday school?
Oh, in Sunday school. No, I've had the older class all
The
day.
adults or?
For the last few years, I used to have the high school, but I didn't for long.
Do you prefer high school or adult?
No, adults.
Adult class. Have you been active in other phases with the First Baptist Church?
Well, I was community mission chairman for 10 years.
Oh, you were?
We don't have that anymore. And I'm one of the money counters now.
The what?
One of the money counters.
Yeah, well, your post office experience ought to help there.
That's fine.
Were you active in the Baptist Church in
Custer.
Custer?
I taught a class there
Did
too.
you? And was that an
I was
adult?
treasurer there too.
Well, was that an adult or?
Well, I taught a group of boys on, I suppose, 12, 14, something like that for a while. And then I taught the adult class there.
Have you been active in any community or civic activity or cultural activity?
Well, I've been regent of the DAR 4 years.
Tell us about that.
Well, you know what that is,
Sure.
the Daughters of American
Yes.
Revolution.
Is,
I'm quite interested in that.
I know what the DAR is. I don't know what a regent is. Is a regent the president?
The regent is the highest officer.
It would be the equivalent.
The same as president.
Yes. And
I've been the state committeeman 4 years.
Why don't you tell about the DAR organization here? I'm not interested in so much in the national one, but on the DA, tell about the organization and your participation in the DAR here in this area.
Of course, naturally, I've been quite interested in it. If I was regent 4 years and vice regent 2 years, so it is really a patriotic educational organization.
What have they sponsored here? That's can you think of anything that's...
We don't sponsor anything in the town, but we support a school in the mountains of Carolina, North Carolina. It's fully supported by the DAR.
Yeah.
Then there are other schools that we contribute to too. And then there's the DAR kitchen in office in the DAR building in Washington, D.C. Now, I've attended the National Congress one time, that's all.
Can you think of any other civic activities in addition to DAR?
Well, I've been president of all the clubs that I belong to.
Have you? Oh, what are they?
Well, I belong to a literary club, Worthwhile Club, and that is the literary club. I've been.
What is when was it organized? Do you remember?
Oh, before I came over here.
It's called Worthwhile Club?
Then I belong to the Allied Arts Club, the literary division, and the Garden Flower division, and I'm president of the Garden Flower organization, and I'm vice president for another year of the literary club.
What is the activity of the literary club?
Well, we just have lessons, and usually I notice I haven't belonged. The Allied Arts Club had 3 divisions, and I belong to the Garden Flower Club, but I haven't been active in the literary club until this year because I had too much else to do.
Can you tell me anything about the history or the story of the literary club and what their activity is?
Well, I started to tell you that I don't know whether this has always been the case or not, but this year all their lessons are book reviews. And the books are reviewed by what they call the book committee before they're given out to be reviewed to the club. In the garden club, we have just lessons pertaining to garden flower, to that sort of things most of the time. Sometimes we have variations.
Has the garden club had any planting, general planting activities such as a park or anything like that?
Well, yes, we've participated in in helping with the park. That was years ago. Of course, this old park isn't anymore. We used to help down there. But then there's another park out south of town. I don't know what they call that, but we've contributed to that. And our clubs contribute to the Salvation Army and well, different organizations like that.
Do you recall here again in any of these clubs any highlight events or anything unusual that might be interesting and maybe should be recorded as a part of history?
Well, I can't think.
Yeah, it wouldn't have to be something of a earth-shaking nature. It could be something funny, or it could be something that would shed some light on the activity and such of the organization. If you can.
Well, I just can't think.
Can't think of any particular.
All the clubs do something that's worthwhile.
Oh yes. In recent years, who are some of the persons you consider more or less the outstanding personalities of Clinton? Can you think of any in particular?
Well, I think a lot of people that I think are outstanding. There are a good many people in our church that are quite outstanding. Mr. Barker, Denver Meacham, and Mr. Tennant, Barney Brown, the Herwald man, and Owen Barone, and there are a lot more. And then I don't have any children of my own, but I have 5 stepchildren.
Oh, you do?
Dr. Cunningham is my stepchild, stepson, Russell Cunningham. And then then I have another stepdaughter that teaches in the university, and another daughter that's secretary for her brother. And then the Simon men are all merchants and doctors. And there's
You've seen Clinton grow over the period of time. Can you recall any highlights of his growth? Maybe the paving of the streets. That must have been.
Yes, and we one time had a streetcar.
Tell about that.
Well, that's all I taught here, to put in the streetcar.
Yeah.
I guess those 8 years are the happiest years I ever had.
Well,
had the most
that you were teaching.
Best time.
And you traveled the streetcar.
Well, there was a streetcar went up between the 2 stations, railroad stations.
When did they take it down?
Well, it's been a long time ago, but I wouldn't know the year, but I could get that
No,
for
that's
you.
all right.
I wouldn't know.
Was the paving of the streets here a big event? I understand it was the mid-1920s.
It was a big event, but I wasn't here at that time.
Oh, you were not here at that time?
I left here in 1916 teaching.
Oh,
But I know there were big events.
Did you attend any of the early 4th of July picnics that happened?
Oh, yes.
Tell about them.
Well, the first year I was here, Buzz's grandfather lived down here, I guess on 6th Street. And I was there during the 4th of July celebration. And my folks that lived at Butler, and everybody that came, they went off. And I didn't know anyone, so I just stayed at the house. And I was busy all that day entertaining people from Butler. Everybody stopped to see the folks, and the tent was down the streets, down this or something. Oh, and the town was alive with people. It was just some big time. I think it was 3-day celebration.
I understood that they had 3 days off. Had 3 days.
They did it at Raffle too.
That's
And it was something. The first year I was out there, I was just excited beyond words.
I understood that they had some rather interesting and outstanding speakers in these early 4th of July.
They did.
Can you recall any particular?
Well, like William Jennings Bryan was the only one.
Did you hear him?
Yes, I did.
Several mentioned him. Do you remember what he talked about?
Oh no, it's been too long.
Everyone said he was great. You don't remember what he
It
talked
was
about?
great. It was out at the TV stand. Oh, it was wonderful. He's on a big man.
Do you remember what year he talked?
Oh, no, I couldn't say, but I wasn't here then.
Oh.
But I came
Oh,
in.
you didn't hear him?
I did hear him. I came into it, but see, I lived on the farm. My folks lived on a farm 10 miles northeast of here, and I came in.
Came in here.
Buzz's mother was just like a sister to me. And everything, there's anytime and things going on, I came in. She'd always call and have me come in.
Can you think of any other events that you came in for?
Oh, there were a lot of parties and things like that. I came. You know, they didn't have any cars then.
No. Tell about the first car that you ever saw.
Well, that was quite an event. That was the first year I was in Oklahoma. I was teaching at Raffle that time. And Buzz's grandmother and grandfather moved over here the year that I came to Oklahoma. And of course I was over, every 2 weeks she had us come over here, another girl and I. And she belonged to a literary club over in Raffle. It was quite a nice club. And she entertained them over here. And of course they all drove a team over. And one man by the name of Clint Strong had a new car. And they live up on the same home that they live now, where Buzz's mother lives now, is on 11th Street. And that hitching post for horses, you know that. And they had to go out and take care of the horses when that car went along. And it came up the awfulest storm. Oh, just a rainstorm and all. And I don't know what they did about the horses. I don't remember anything about that. But anyway, they had to all stay all night.
The horses didn't like that car, did they?
Oh, they just had to go out and hold it. And he just went up and down that street I don't know how many times.
Maybe they anticipated that that car is what was going to run them out of business. But you did, eventually. The car eventually ran the horses out of business.
Oh, yes, they did. But that was quite a little while before.
Yes, but there may have been a premonition there.
Well, Clint Strong was one of the early settlers here, one of the outstanding men.
What about the first telephones here?
Well, they had telephones when I came.
When you first came here? Did they have, and it was light, the streets lighted then? Well, no, I mean when you first saw, when you first came into this area, were there telephones?
Yes.
When street
Not
lights?
through the country. I don't know that they were through the country.
In the town.
And they were in the towns.
And they had electricity for that time.
Oh,
too.
yes, they had electricity.
Um,
I don't recall them having street lights at Arapahoe the year I was there, but they might have. If there were, they weren't electric lights, I don't believe.
Could have been gas lights.
I believe we just had lamps that time. I know we did on the farm.
Let's see. What should I ask you that I haven't?
I don't know.
Think of anything. You're doing very well.
Well, I don't know that I've done so well. A lot of things I know that I haven't said. Well, when I came, there was very little of Clinton here, but as I said, I talked down here, and I stayed with my cousin up here on 11th Street. And actually, when I'd go home some night, it seemed to me that another building started before I got back the next morning. It was just thrilling to me.
What was the tallest building when you came here?
Well, these buildings, I think on the front street, in Frisco, I believe, were all there.
And what were they?
Well, they were about like the same things they are now, but maybe different.
What was the first tall building what's the tallest building now in
Well, isn't the hotel down there?
Would it be?
No,
What's the name of that
that
hotel?
was rebuilt.
What was the name of that hotel?
Grace Hotel was
Grace.
first.
The Grace.
Mm-hmm.
When, do you remember when it was built?
I don't remember the year, but it was while I was teaching here.
It
I
was.
went to the banquet, the opening banquet.
Tell about the opening banquet. Do you remember?
Well, I was just sitting on top of the world.
Is that right?
Well, I thought it was just wonderful. We used to have so many banquets and things, and I always got to go because there were a lot more boys than girls.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good time to live here.
Yeah, I guess so. The
Traveling men made this their headquarters, you know, there were a lot of young men. And the traveling men would have banquets, you know, every year.
what companies were here when you first came here?
Well, Nash Finch was here, and Humphreys, a man by the name of Humphreys, and that old building's still there, and Dr. Lincolnfelder has some, like those styrofoam looking things.
Mm-hmm.
And then one on the south side, I can't remember. That was.
Cotton oil mills here, I guess.
Oh, they were there.
Mm-hmm.
There was another man, which was a very outstanding man
Who was
here,
he?
Mr. Lowry, Charles Lowry.
Mm-hmm. What was he?
He had charge of the cotton
Cotton oil mill.
Yeah.
I understand.
And Nelson, too, was another one. Nelson Grain Company was on the other side
Yes.
of the street.
What, while you were in this area, what would you say was the most exciting thing that happened in town, or one or two things that really you recall as being exciting things that happened?
All of them were exciting to me.
Are they?
Well, I think 4th of July and those entertainments were very outstanding for the whole country. And then they still have a reunion.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's quite a big affair. That's a county, several counties.
Yes.
And they meet at different, used to meet at Clinton all the time, but now they meet at Cordell, Nelk City.
Well.
It'll take a year about, I think, for that. They're quite something.
Well, do you think anything else?
I probably will when I go home.
Yeah, probably. This has been an interview with Mrs. Elizabeth Cunningham in Clinton in April of 1971.